Welcome to the 12th week of the Henry George Daily Devotional. We are now on episode 56. We are in chapter 5, The Problem Solved, chapter 1. This is our third time reading this chapter. What? The primary cause of recurring paroxysmal industrial depression? Is that? No, that's not the. I called that chapter. Oh, I didn't title. Oh, we are still. Far be it from me to remember what I read 2 days ago. Okay, George writes, when in all trades there is what we call scarcity of employment, when everywhere labor wastes while desire is unsatisfied, must not the obstacle which prevents labor from producing the wealth it needs lie at the foundation of the industrial structure? I agree with that sort of intuitively, but I don't see how this is like forcing. I was in a long discussion yesterday about whether or not, or what the causes of depressions were, and the person I was arguing with very much believed it had to do with inflation or deflation and currency manipulation, and this kind of a claim wouldn't really, they wouldn't really just accept it. But of course, there's all the stuff that George just talked about that I was trying to express to him. That foundation is land. Milliners, optical instrument makers, gilders, and polishers are not the pioneers of new settlements. Miners did not go to California or Australia because shoemakers, tailors, machinists, and printers were there, but those trades followed the miners, just as they are now following the gold diggers into the Black Hills and the diamond diggers into South Africa. It is not the storekeeper who is the cause of the farmer, but the farmer who brings the storekeeper. It is not the growth of the city that develops the country, but the development of the country that makes the city grow. And hence, when through all trades men willing to work cannot find opportunity to do so, the difficulty must arise in the employment that creates a demand for all other employments. It must be because labor is shut out from land. In Leeds or Lowell, in Philadelphia or Manchester, in London or New York, it may require a grasp of first principles to see this, but where industrial development has not become so elaborate, nor the extreme links of the chain so widely separated, one has but to look at obvious facts. Although not yet 30 years old, the city of San Francisco, both in population and in commercial importance, ranks among the great cities of the world, and next to New York is the most metropolitan of American cities. Though not yet 30 years old, she has had for some years an increasing number of unemployed men. Clearly, here it is because men cannot find employment in the country that there are so many unemployed in the city. For when the harvest opens, they go trooping out, and when it is over, they come trooping back to the city again. If these now unemployed men were producing wealth from the land, they would not only be employing themselves, but would be employing all the mechanics of the city, giving custom to the storekeepers, trade to the merchants, audiences to the theaters, and subscribers and advertisements to the newspapers, creating effective demand that would be felt in New England and Old England. Old England. And wherever throughout the world came the articles that, when they have the means to pay for them, such a population consumes. Yes. Now, why is it that this unemployed labor cannot employ itself upon the land? Not that the land is all in use, though all the symptoms that in older countries are taken as showing a redundancy of population are beginning to manifest themselves in San Francisco. It is idle to talk of redundancy of population in a state that with greater natural resources than France has not yet 1 million people. Yeah. Uh, California is huge, and and it's just so clear when we read this in retrospect that when people argue that there's too many people alive, and then we're like, wait, that was like 100 years ago. Well, now it's 150 years, I guess, since George wrote. Um, that argument has been disproven. Yeah. Within a few miles of San Francisco is unused land enough to give employment to every man who wants it. I do not mean to say that every unemployed man could turn farmer or build himself a house if he had the land, but that enough could and would do so to give employment to the rest. What is it then that prevents labor from employing itself on this land? Simply that it has been monopolized and is held at speculative prices based not upon present value, but upon the added value that will come with the future growth of population. Monopoly. Speculation. We may thus be seen in San Francisco. What may thus be seen in San Francisco by whoever is willing to see, may, I doubt not, be seen as clearly in other places. I can't remember if I said this on the devotional or not. The Fed didn't exist during George's time, and I believe that the Federal Reserve, through its manipulation of the currency, by printing more or requesting more printing of the currency, and then by handing this out to the banks at the interest rate it determines, through trial and error, it seems that they have been able to blunt how severe depression is, but at the same time they end up blunting how good the good times go. I keep thinking to myself, I'll find that graph. Um, Recessions in USA. It's 200 years. Um, List of recessions. We don't need a graph. I mean, this graph kind of does it. You can see, well, no, starting in 23. I don't know when was the Federal Reserve created. 1913. Yeah, Depression era. Never mind. Although maybe you could make some vague argument that's not going to be very convincing, I suppose, that like the Federal Reserve figured out what it was doing over time. Although it does seem like there's just been fewer depressions. I could see how you look at this and think things have sort of gotten better, but I mean, the gaps. I mean, there has been progress in our society for many people, for the sum of society. I mean, that's the 2008 depression there. Of course, we don't call it a depression; it's a recession. It's a recession. I don't know where that graph is that would go back well before the Federal Reserve. Maybe one day I'll find it. The present commercial and industrial depression, which first clearly manifested itself in the United States in 1872, this is being written in 1879, 7 years later, and has spread with greater or less intensity over the civilized world, is largely attributed to the undue extension of the railroad system, with which there are many things that seem to show its relation. I am fully conscious that the construction of railroads before they are actually needed may divert capital and labor from more or less productive employments, and make a community poorer instead of richer. And when the railroad mania was at its highest, I pointed this out in a political tract addressed to the people of California. Footnote. I guess this was in The Subsidy Question and the Democratic Party that he wrote in 1871. George says, or continues, this is not the footnote, but to assign to this wasting of capital such a widespread industrial deadlock seems to me like attributing an unusually low tide to the drawing of a few extra bucketfuls of water. The waste of capital and labor during the Civil War was enormously greater than it could possibly be by the construction of unnecessary railroads, but without producing any such result. And certainly there seems to be little sense in talking of the waste of capital and labor in railroads as causing this depression, when the prominent feature of the depression has been the superabundance of capital and labor seeking employment. Yeah, that's interesting to realize that people blamed a depression on prematurely building railroads. Hmm. Yet, that there is a connection between the rapid construction of railroads and industrial depression, anyone who understands what increased land value means and who has noticed the effect which the construction of railroads has upon land speculation can easily see. Wherever a railroad was built or projected, excuse me, lands sprang up in value under the influence of speculation, and thousands of millions of dollars were added to the nominal values which capital and labor were asked to pay outright, or to pay in installments, as the price of being allowed to go to work and produce wealth. Yeah, I didn't finish that sentence correctly. But we understand that a bunch of people bought all the land that was now accessible by railroad and are sitting on it or charging people a bunch of money to use it. The inevitable result was to check production, and this check to production propagated itself in a cessation of demand, which checked production to the furthest verge of the wide circle of exchanges operating with accumulated force in the centers of the great industrial commonwealth into which commerce links the civilized world. Justin in the chat says, so the railroad system was implemented too quickly, is what he is positing. He did argue that in a tract he wrote called The Subsidy Question of the Democratic Party. However, while other people now also have taken up that criticism, he does not think that that in and of itself causes the depression they are in. He says that that would be that's like attributing an unusually low tide, which would be the depression. There's a large low tide, and it'd be like saying that the low tide is due to a few extra bucketfuls of water. Yes, it was a bit wasteful for the government or whoever to provide a bunch of subsidies to the railroad industries to build railroads. But that seems such a small thing. It's hard to blame that for this entire society-wide industrial, depression. He says that the Civil War was a huge waste of capital, many, many times larger than the waste of capital in prematurely building railroads, yet that did not cause a depression. He says the cause of the depression then is that what the railroad did was enable tons of people to start speculating on land, which then causes land to not be used correctly, which creates this check to production. If land is not used, it's not producing. In the whole context of this thing, we talk about land being used well. We basically mean land being used to produce as much as it can possibly produce. And then remembering what I talked about on Friday, I think, or what George wrote early in the chapter, we assume demand sort of stays constant, and so what happens? Like, why can't I go buy the fancy shoes I want to buy that the shoemaker has available in his store? It's because again, assuming want and desire is constant. you could then say, well, that's because nobody wants to buy the the candles that I make. I'm a candle maker. Or no, but they want to buy it, but they're not able to buy my candles. Well, why can't they buy my candles? You can keep going through this train of things, and eventually it ends up that at a base level, somebody wants to buy a thing, and they just haven't been able to produce anything themselves. They just literally don't have any wealth to trade for it. Production has failed in some regard. Somebody used to be able to make things, or more people have come along and they just can't produce things to satisfy their desire. And then that you work your way back up the connections of trade, and effectively nobody buys my candles because somewhere the land is not being used to produce. And because nobody buys my candles, I can't go buy your shoes. And because nobody buys your shoes sit there on the shelves, and we call this whole thing a depression, because there has been this check to production somewhere down the line, and that is because somewhere down the line land is not being used to produce. That is the Georgist explanation of uh, industrial depression. Other forms of monopoly could also mess with that, though, of course. Uh, but yeah, the inevitable result. So back to the railroad example. Um, yeah, wherever railroad was built or projected, the lands sprang up in value under the influence of speculation, and thousands of millions of dollars were added to the nominal values, which capital and labor were asked to pay outright or to pay in installments as the price of being allowed to go to work and produce wealth. And again, when we talk about the cost for land and land rent, we mean the access to it, um, the like the ability to work the land. But it is not the amount that like if you work the land and create something, what you create is not the rent. The rent is what you would be willing to pay just to have access to that land. They are related, but they're not the same. Anyway, the inevitable result was to check production because they're allowed to get there. And this, economists use very obscure phrases sometimes. Cessation of demand, check production, great industrial commonwealth, all in one sentence. Oh, and you like my shirt, thank you. They do use complicated terms, and George wrote a long time ago when they wrote very long, complicated sentences. You know, this is my second time reading the book. I've been in many lectures about this. I've also read many articles about Georgism, and so I have familiarized myself with all these terms. But of course, uh, I was very confused. I still get confused in his long sentences. So if you ever have any questions, ask them, and I'll do my best to try to clear things up. All right, let's get back to this nice, healthy sentence. The inevitable result was to check production, and this check to production propagated itself in a cessation of demand. So check production means the amount of wealth being created was slowed down, just less than it could be, and then this propagated itself, meaning it echoed through society, uh, just through the, as he says, I think down here, links of commerce, and creating more of a cessation of demand, which means basically I'm no longer able to act on my desire to buy shoes because I was not able to produce. My production was ceased, so then I wasn't able to actually create demand for shoes because I wasn't able to pay. This then checks production, again stopping other production, to the furthest verge. edge of the wide circle of exchanges, operating with accumulated force in the centers of the great industrial commonwealth into which commerce links the civilized world. Yeah, this is like one of the great benefits of society is how we can interlink everything in the division of labor. But then when there is a failure of this kind, because of the interlinking, we all sort of fail together. The primary operations of this cause can perhaps be nowhere more clearly traced than in California, which, from its comparative isolation, has constituted a particularly well-defined community. Okay, I live in California. Until almost its close, the last decade was marked in California by the same industrial activity which was shown in the northern states, and in fact throughout the civilized world, when the interruption of exchanges and the disarrangement of industry caused by the war, Civil War, and the blockade of southern ports is considered. This activity could not be attributed to inflation of the currency or to lavish expenditures of the general government, to which the Eastern states for the comparative activity of the same period has since been attributed. For in spite of legal tender laws, the Pacific coast adhered to a coin currency, and the taxation of the federal government took away very much more than was returned in federal expenditures. Alright, so let's see here. We're saying California's economy was isolated from the northern states. We're saying we can't attribute whatever happens in California to legal tender laws, like, basically getting off of the gold standard, because California didn't really do that. And then we're saying that the federal government did take away taxes and was not giving much support or as an equal amount of support back to California. That's what he's describing as the state of things. I'm just going to accept that as an accurate depiction of history, and then we'll see what George says. This activity, could not be attributed to this. It was attributable solely to normal causes. For though placer mining was declining, I think that just means I don't know what mining is versus placer mining. I think I've looked this up before. Yeah, sifting for the bits of gold, like the traditional 49ers. The Nevada silver mines were being opened. Wheat and wool were beginning to take the place of gold in the table of exports, and an increasing population and the improvements of methods in the methods of production and exchange were steadily adding to the efficiency of labor. With this material progress went on a steady enhancement in land values. Its consequence. Okay, I'm with George so far. We're saying that California developed and its land values went up. This steady advance engendered a speculative advance, which, with the railroad era, ran up land values in every direction. Yes, so people see that there's development, land values have gone up, so they anticipate the land values will go up more, so they buy land and they withhold it from society or don't use it. They're only spending their money simply to claim that land so that they can sell it for more later. This is hugely exacerbated then by the railroads, because now people really think the land values will go up. If the population of California had steadily grown when the long, costly, fever-haunted isthmus route was the principal mode of communication with the Atlantic states, he's saying that if we didn't have railroads and you still had to sail around what is that isthmus called? Cape Horn is over there. Cape, what is it called? Doesn't say anything. Yeah, this is Cape Horn. Never mind. Cabo de Hornos. Yeah. So if you had to sail, isn't that crazy? People say, I mean, well before the Panama Canal. It was like better, it was easier to sail all the way around than like traveling by wagon or something. Anyway, but of course then they finished the railroads. Um, so if California had developed when they had to sail around this fever-haunted isthmus, it was thought, increase enormously with the opening of a road which would bring New York Harbor and San Francisco Bay within 7 days' easy travel, and when in the state itself the locomotive took the place of the stagecoach and freight wagon. The expected increase of land values which would thus accrue was discounted in advance. Lots on the outskirts of San Francisco rose hundreds and thousands %, and farming land was taken up and held for higher prices, in whichever direction an immigrant was likely to go. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I read this before, and now I guess some of this I'm remembering, and some of this I clearly forgot. But what a great example to have in my pocket when I get in these arguments. That look at this. We used to have to sail ships from San Francisco around the bottom of South America over to the East Coast. And then when we made a railroad across the United States, industry depressed. Industry went down. It was like better when we were sailing around than it was after we built a railroad. That's something is clearly fudged up. Uh, all right. I know I've been going kind of slow today, but I want to finish this chapter. But the anticipated rush of immigrants did not take place. Labor and so yeah, all the prices went up, anticipating immigration, but the anticipated rush of immigrants did not take place. Labor and capital could not pay so much for land and make fair returns. Production was checked, if not absolutely, at least relatively. As the transcontinental railroads approached completion, instead of increased activity, symptoms of depression began to manifest themselves, and when it was completed, to the season of activity had succeeded a period of depression which has not since been fully recovered from. This was in 72, he was saying, and now he's writing in 79, so he's saying it's been a 7 year depression, during which wages and interests have steadily fallen. It's funny because you see as a kid that like picture of them like finally joining together the railroad with that final railroad spike, and everyone's all happy and like, yeah, 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 but it's like, oh shit, depression time. What I have called the actual rent line, George writes, or margin of cultivation, is thus, as well as by the steady march of improvement and increase of population, which, though slower than it otherwise would have been, still goes on, is that so? This sentence. What I've called the actual line or margin of rent is thus approaching the speculative line of rent. But the tenacity with which a speculative advance in the price of land is maintained in a developing community is well known. A footnote, George writes, it is astonishing how in a new country of great expectations, speculative prices of land will be kept up. It is common to hear the expression, there is no market for real estate, you cannot sell it at any price, and yet, at the same time, if you go to buy it, unless you find somebody who is absolutely compelled to sell, you must pay the prices that prevailed when speculation ran high. For owners, believing that land values must ultimately advance, hold on as long as they can. Yeah, this line, there is no market for real estate, you cannot sell it at any price. It's sort of a weird way to put it, but basically they're saying you want to sell your land, well, you can't find anybody to buy it. And yet, even though you can't find anybody to buy it, which is, I feel like that's sort of the situation sort of right now, I think, for like home sales. Uh, we've turned a point where maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're still earlier in the speculation point, but you definitely know you get to a point when everyone who's selling a house no longer can find a buyer, yet they're not willing to lower the price for quite some time. All right, we're done with the footnote. George writes, now, what thus went on in California went on in every progressive section of the Union. Everywhere that a railroad was built or projected, land was monopolized in anticipation, and the benefit of the improvement was discounted in increased land values. Quick point, on a small scale, this exact same thing happens whenever a metro line like the subways or probably even bus routes to some extent, but mostly subways when their subway lines are extended, metro lines in whatever city. Um, Everywhere that a railroad was built or projected, land was monopolized in anticipation, and the benefit of the improvement was discounted in increased land values. The speculative advance in rent thus outrunning the normal advance, production was checked, then demand was decreased, and labor and capital were turned back from occupations more directly concerned with land, to glut those in which the value of land is a less perceptible element. It is thus that the rapid extension of railroads is related to the succeeding depression. And what went on in the United States went on in a greater or less obvious degree all over the progressive world. Everywhere land values have been steadily increasing with material progress, and everywhere this increase begot a speculative advance. The impulse of the primary cause not only radiated from the newer sections of the Union to the older sections, and from the United States to Europe, but everywhere the primary cause was acting, and hence a worldwide depression of industry and commerce, begotten of a worldwide material progress. Yeah, crazy. The worldwide material progress, we invent the steam engine, we start building railroads, and then we end up with a worldwide depression because, George claims, of speculation. There is one thing which it may seem I have overlooked in attributing these industrial depressions to the speculative advance of rents or land values as a main and primary cause. Okay, one thing he may have overlooked in his attribution. The operation of such a cause, though it may be rapid, must be progressive, resembling a pressure, not a blow. But these industrial depressions seem to come suddenly. They have at their beginning the character of a paroxysm. I think this is an old way of saying spasm or, fit convulsion spasm. We looked that up before. Followed by a comparative lethargy, as if of exhaustion. Okay, I guess George has run this argument by people before, and they say, no, George, it can't be this steady land speculation because that operates somewhat slowly, and these depressions are a sudden experience. So George is addressing this. He says, everything seems to be going on as usual, commerce and industry vigorous and expanding, when suddenly there comes a shock, as of a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. A bank breaks, a great manufacturer or merchant falls, and as if a blow had thrilled through the entire industrial organization, failure succeeds failure, and on every side workmen are discharged from employment and capital shrinks into profitless security. Let me explain what I think to be the reason for this. To do so, let me explain what I think to be the reason. Okay. To do so, we must take into account sorry for some of the noise. I hope this is still listenable. Are you still in the chat, Justin? Let me know. We must take... Okay, cool. We must take into account the manner in which exchanges are made, for it is by exchanges that all the varied forms of industry are linked together into one mutually related and interdependent organization. To enable exchanges to be made between producers far removed by space and time, large stocks must be kept in store and in transit, and this, as I have already explained, I take to be the great function of capital, in addition to that of supplying tools and seed. uh, enabling trade, I think. To enable exchanges. Yes, to enable exchanges to be made far and wide is one of the great functions of capital. These exchanges are perhaps necessarily largely made upon credit. That is to say, the advance upon one side is made before the return is received on the other. Okay, that's the situation with capital and trade and credit. So then George writes, now, without stopping to inquire as to the causes, it is manifest that these advances are, as a rule, from the more highly organized and later developed industries to the more fundamental. The West Coast African, for instance, who exchanges palm oil and coconuts for gaudy calico and Birmingham idols, gets his return immediately. The English merchant, on the contrary, has to lay out of his goods for a long while before he gets his returns. The farmer can sell his crop as soon as it is harvested and for cash. The great manufacturer must keep a large stock, send his goods long distances to agents, and generally sell on time. Thus, as advances and credits are generally from what we may call the secondary to what we may call the primary industries, it follows that any check to production which proceeds from the latter, that is the primary industries, will not immediately manifest itself in the former, the secondary industries, like the merchants. So if there's a check to production to the farmer or to the West Coast African, it will not immediately manifest itself in the secondary industries like the merchant and the great manufacturer. The system of advances and credits constitutes, as it were, an elastic connection, which will give considerably before breaking, but which, when it breaks, will break with a snap. Or, to illustrate in another way what I mean, the great pyramid of Giza is composed of layers of masonry, the bottom layer, of course, supporting all the rest. Could we by some means gradually contract this bottom layer, the upper part of the pyramid would for some time retain its form, and when gravitation at length overcame the adhesiveness of the material, would not diminish gradually and regularly, but would break off suddenly in large pieces. And down comes the pyramid. Now the industrial organization may be likened to such a pyramid. What is the proportion which, in a given stage of social development, the various industries bear to each other, it is difficult and perhaps impossible to say. Yes, and a lot of people get lost in these weeds of complexity and they assume that because industry and society is so complicatedly intertwined that the solution to many of its problems must also be complicated and intertwined. That is an assumption. People must realize that is an assumption, and it may or may not be true. Very complicated and difficult to understand phenomena, or I don't know, things arise often from very simple, basic rules. The rules of lots of games demonstrate this. Simple rules, very complex results. So yeah, so it's like difficult or perhaps impossible to be able to place every part of a society's industry, find its analog in the pyramid. But George writes, it is obvious there is such a proportion, just as a printer's font of type, there is a certain proportion between the various letters. Well, that's a very funny funny analogy. Each form of industry, as it is developed by division of labor, springs from and rises out of the others, and all rest ultimately upon land. It is fitting that it all comes we talk about, land is what supports us all. It's literally and industrially, economically. We stand on the land. For without land, Stand on the land. For without land, labor is as impotent as would be a man in void space. To make the illustration closer to the condition of a progressive country, imagine a pyramid composed of superimposed layers, the whole constantly growing and expanding. Imagine the growth of the layer nearest the ground to be checked. The others will, for a time, keep on expanding. In fact, for the moment, the tendency will be to quicker expansion, for the vital force which is refused scope on the ground layer will strive to find vent in those above, until at length there is a decided overbalance and a sudden crumbling along all the faces of the pyramid. There's a little subtlety there. When the farmer can no longer farm their land and make a good profit, I hesitate to use the word profit because that's a confusing term. If the farmer can no longer work land and make that much wealth or produce much off of it because of speculation, they may then try to get a job higher up the chain as a jeweler, as a video game designer, and so there will be more jewelers and more video games being made for a brief amount of time, and then it becomes clear, oh shit, no one's making food anymore. George continues. Alright, we're almost done. That the main cause and general course of the recurring paroxysms of industrial depression, which are becoming so marked a feature of modern social life, are thus explained, is, I think, clear. And let the reader remember that it is only the main causes and general courses of such phenomena that we are seeking to trace, or that, in fact, it is possible to trace with any exactness. Political economy can deal, and has need to deal, only with general tendencies. I get angry about this when people I'm discussing with really want to find little exceptions to the rules of wages or rent or something. We are looking for general rules, generalities. The derivative forces are so multiform, and the actions and reactions are so various that the exact character of the phenomena cannot be predicted. We know that if a tree is cut through, it will fall, but precisely in what direction will be determined by the inclination of the trunk, the spread of the branches, the impact of the blows, the quarter and force of the wind. And even a bird lighting on a twig, or a frightened squirrel leaping from bough to bough, will not be without its influence. We know that an insult will arouse a feeling of resentment in the human breast, but to say how far and in what way it will manifest itself would require a synthesis which would build up the entire man and all his surroundings, past and present. Damn, son. The manner in which the sufficient cause to which I have traced them explains the main features of these industrial depressions is in striking contrast with the contradictory and self-contradictory attempts which have been made to explain them on the current theories of the distribution of wealth. Yeah. Everyone else is an idiot. George has it all figured out. That a speculative advance in rent or land values invariably precedes each of these seasons of industrial depression is everywhere clear. That they bear to each other the relations of cause and effect is obvious to whosoever considers the necessary relations between land and labor. And that the present depression is running its course, and that in the manner previously indicated a new equilibrium is being established, which will result in another season of comparative activity, may already be seen in the United States. The normal rent line and the speculative rent line are being brought together. 1. By the fall in speculative land values, which is very evident in the reduction of rents and shrinkage of real estate values in the principal cities. So, rents going down. So speculation is decreasing because it hasn't been paying. 2. By the increased efficiency of labor arising from growth of population and the utilization of new inventions and discoveries, some of which, almost as important as that of the use of steam, we seem to be on the very verge of grasping. When was the uh, history? 1798. That was long. So in Nicholas Otto patented the first atmospheric gas engine in 72. Oh no, 1864. 72. Brayton did his. 76. Two-stroke engine. Um, so 79. Right as George penned that is when Carl Benz patented the two-stroke gasoline engine. And then in 92, then he got his first charged compression engine. I don't know. Wonder what George had in mind when he was saying that we're on the verge of grasping new inventions. A third point for why the normal rent line and the speculative rent line are being brought together is by the lowering of the habitual standard of interest and wages. Yes, okay. These were the three things he was saying remedy depressions at the beginning. Now I'm remembering. Speculation will go down. More people are born, and there are inventions, so labor becomes stronger. And then three, some people are willing to accept a lower amount of wealth to live off of. By the lowering of the habitual standard of interest and wages, which, as to interest, is shown by the negotiation of a government loan at 4%, and as to wages, is too generally evident for any special citation. Yes, and of course we know George's interests go up when wages go up and go down when wages go down because interest is the return to capital. Capital is stored up labor. Wages is the return to labor. So interest is the return to stored up labor. Interest is proportional to wages in a George's framework. When the equilibrium is thus reestablished, a season of renewed activity culminating again in the speculative advance of land values, the cycle starts over anew, will set in. Footnote. This was written a year ago. It is now July 1879, evident that a new period of activity has commenced as above predicted, and in New York and Chicago, real estate prices have already begun to recover. But wages and interest will not recover their lost ground. The net result of all these perturbations or wave-like movements is the gradual forcing of wages and interest toward their minimum. These temporary and recurring depressions exhibit, in fact, as was noticed in the opening chapter, but intensifications of the general movement which accompanies material progress. Sad but true. All right, that was a long one. See you tomorrow. Disputably true. Do you dispute it? What did we get in here? Well, how about this? Do you accept his explanation for why depressions occur? Depressions occur suddenly while speculation advances like a pressure building, um, like the fall of a pyramid. Secondary industries loan to extend credit to primary industries. When a primary industry falls, there's a delay. There's even labor redirected from primary industries into secondary when um, solution must be um, foundational, since all of trade is affected. Um, yeah, we spent a lot of time on the railroad. Crazy that finishing, alright, subsidizing the railroad completion was premature. This was a small waste of capital compared to the waste in Civil War. This small waste cannot explain alone the Depression, the increase in land values and speculation across the USA is to blame. Only only because one, more population and invention comes along. Or no, that was two. Two, um, speculation line drops and meets up with normal rent line. Two, more population and invention enables more labor. And three, people accept lower wages and interest. Recall, interest is payment for stored up labor. Um, it's a long old chapter here, man. Um, since all of trade is affected, the solution must be general. Um, remember, we're only looking for a general tendency or answer. Society is too complex to determine exact chain of events, like predicting how a tree will fall. Um, Based on my incredibly limited understanding of the text, it reads as if he is promoting the stifling of technological progress, and that great advances such as the railroad or the pyramids are in fact a hindrance economically. Um, so he likens the pyramid to our society, to our structure of trade. And the pyramid analogy is just to demonstrate that when the base of the pyramid is shrunk, well, he likens it then to a growing pyramid where the bottom is growing, the middle is growing, the top, everything is growing. simultaneously. And then were the bottom to stop growing and the other parts of a pyramid to continue growing, they could do so for a brief amount of time and then it would all fall suddenly. That's just to explain why a depression happens suddenly when or if it comes from this base check to production at the base level. That's simply an analogy. The the railroad was talked about because it was an example of this invention that would help uh, create more wealth, saving labor. You wouldn't have to sail a boat all the way around the world, well, all the way around South America. So it was a labor-saving invention. And, naively everyone would think, oh, labor-saving invention means we're all going to be able to make more wealth. But what we saw was that this labor-saving invention got everyone excited to just buy and speculate on land all across America. So now all this land is being held by speculators. And because they're charging so much, people aren't able to work it. And then this causes that base of the pyramid to stop growing. There's then a time where this is unnoticed, and then the depression hits. And this wave of speculation was triggered by this new invention of the steam engine, and a little fuel was poured onto the fire of speculation by the government subsidizing building the railroad. Even if you didn't have such a clear example of an invention like the railroad, like the steam engine, there is generally a tendency in society for more people to be born, so there's going to be more labor available, and there's a general tendency for people to develop new ways of using labor or new inventions to help labor. So there is always a kind of something like the railroads being invented, but not quite as clear a thing. And so in general, there's this anticipation in society of people wanting more land. And so in general, people want to buy land and speculate. And the more there's speculation, the less there is well-used land, the less production there is. And then that is what cyclically triggers a depression. And then when there's a big depression, suddenly all the speculators, they have to give up speculating. You can only speculate on land, or well, if you're a reasonable person, you're only going to speculate on land if the land prices keep going up. And at some point it breaks. And so, in a very weird way, you're sort of right to say that George is criticizing. And no, I can't say that. George is not criticizing the invention of the steam engine and the building of a railroad. He's criticizing that we enable land speculation and land monopoly. And he was also criticizing the government for funding the extension of the railroad. I'd like to read that a little bit more, because I'd be curious to hear what George really thinks how the government should decide, what's best for society. Because I could imagine, right now, say you live in where I live, Long Beach. Well, I used to live in Long Beach, but we want more metro. We want more metro lines, more trains on the metro. So you could imagine the government saying, all right, we're going to build all these metro lines. Um, Now, of course, we think they're way overdue. But you could imagine 100 years ago, uh, being living in like the suburbs of LA, as I do, and being like, or maybe the suburbs, you can imagine the suburbs weren't even built yet, and then people saying, we need to build all these metro lines because there's gonna be suburbs. And you could imagine some people being for it, some people against it. Um, and I don't have a strong opinion on that. It's like, maybe the government can, a strong opinion either in like, is that the purview, is that the job of government, or in that particular instance, is it good or bad? What is bad in that scenario, or that I would anticipate being a Georgist, is like, well, if the government, you know, in 1924 says we're going to build all these metro lines, I would just think, well, that means all the people who own land out where these supposed metro lines are going to go suddenly are going to speculate on it, or more people are going to go buy that land and jack up the prices and speculate on it. And that land, which could have been used well, um, is now going to be used poorly. So I could have seen myself arguing against uh, or having like a mixed reaction towards the railroad. It's like, yeah, we're going to want this railroad, but right now, all we're doing is we're going to just, by building this railroad, we're just enabling speculators. So we got to fix that. But if you have speculation fixed, uh, then I don't see why you would necessarily be against the government subsidizing, mass transit. Um, I mean, I know that there are like geo-libertarians, like Georgist libertarians, who wouldn't really want the government to do any form of planning, or geo-anarchists who wouldn't want the government to do any form of planning. But there's plenty of Georgists who do think that the government, especially like at a local level, city planning is still a good thing. And George himself, trying to like find, yeah, it's like not exactly clear to me what George thinks uh, the role of government, either federal, state, or local, exactly should be. Um, it just definitely needs to change uh, the way we allow for land to be monopolized. Um, all right. Um, while subsidizing the transcontinental railroad was premature, wasn't a big deal. The lost wealth in the Civil War was a much bigger deal. Other people now are blaming the 1870s depression on this. George previously wrote a tract against these subsidies. The 1870s um, the 1870s depression was caused by the accompanying speculation. Um, Crazy that finishing the railroad made industry fall compared to when it had to sail around Cape Horn. Um, This pressure of speculation moves slowly while depressions happen suddenly. This is because I think, like communism, there's a lot of good ideas and thinking behind Georgism, but it's too idealistic and extreme for the U.S. to adopt it in any capacity. Uh, yeah, I mean, the question of adoption is, yeah, like clearly it's going to be very unlikely to radically change society ever. That's always unlikely. As for whether and how much it's similar to socialism, whether socialism has a lot of good ideas, I think socialism has only one good idea, which is the land rent capture idea of Georgism, and then all of its other ideas are inefficient and a misjudging of both human nature and the power of a market or the value of a market, I guess. Um, this is because uh, land is the base, and the tower can and the tower of industry doesn't fall immediately. Consider a growing pyramid, and then the base stops growing. Um, Anticipating exact um, manifestation of the fall is difficult or impossible, like felling a tree. Um, Secondary industries extend credit to primary industries. Um, when these primary industries fail, there's a delay. Like labor in primary industries, when these primary industries have their production checked, there's a delay before secondary industries feel it. Labor in primary industries will, for a time, be employed in secondary industries when checked. The labor in primary industries will move to secondary industries for a time just before the collapse. Um, the government controls and regulates the land in Georgia's economy, right? I feel like a compromise would be. I feel like a compromise would be for the government to have more land holdings, whereby they can curb pre-existing monopolies. Of course, Disney, Walmart hold a huge stake old, in the ownership of land. Um, Basically, take the land from corporations probably is. Uh, I would say that in Georgism, it is not the government who decides how to use the land. Uh, it would be in a Georgist world, you would eliminate the zoning, so people can build and labor in whatever fashion they want. All that the government does is they walk around and they see what the most popular land is and who's got it, and whoever has the most popular land, the most valuable land, they will then tax them in accordance to how desirable that land is, and that tax is to compensate everybody else from not being allowed to go on their land. It is a land popularity tax. Like if you have the really nice land that lets you make millions and billions of dollars because it's in the center of town or in an earlier state of society because it is at the waterfront or something, or has the absolute best apples, that would be in earlier versions of society. If you have the best land in that sense, or in a modern version, you have the best land because it's just like right in downtown, right where right where the train lets off, um, then you will be taxed a lot because everybody wants that part of land, and you're getting a huge unearned benefit from putting your business or doing whatever you want to do on that piece of land. And that money that is taxed is then given back to society. But, I mean, all taxed money should be given back to society in some form, so that's not specifically unique to Georgism, of course. George does advocate that that this should be given back in a universal basic income because his thought was that this would be taking that in his time the land tax would raise more revenue than the other taxes. Like in his time there was no income tax. He was just against the tariffs, and which were effectively like a sales tax. Form of um, mentioned at the start of this chapter. Speculation decreases, labor advances via population or invention, and people accept lower wages and interest. Alright, that is my précis done. I'm all for taxing the rich more, but taxing based on desirability of the land is subjective and discriminative towards the rich. Um, I mean, I'm not gunning to tax the rich if their richness is fairly gained. Richness is a good thing. Wealth is a good thing. Book 5, Chapter 1, Continued 2. The desirability of land is not very subjective. You can just you can just go and look at how much people will pay for land. I mean, it's only as subjective as like we already do a land assessment that's um, lumped in with all of our property taxes because we sort of view land as property, which we should not view land as property. Okay. George explains how land is fundamentally that land being cut out from production causes the base of industry to fail, which results in the collapses we call depressions. Talks about how the great invention of the railroad caused massive land speculation, which caused a massive depression. Oops, I didn't. Also these taxation policies inevitably screw over the middle class before the wealthy get taxed appropriately. Um, the argument that Georgists make one of the arguments in favor of the land tax, oops, this is a tag, is that um, it really would be difficult for the wealthy to dodge it. Um, we know where the land is. We don't need to go into their house to like figure out do they have what kind of materials and workmanship went into making this property. We don't have to rely on somebody to estimate, how nice the property structure is. We basically can just look at the size of the plot of land, compare it to all the other plots of land near it, and you can determine a rate of value per, acre, and then you assess this. We say, all right, you have an acre of land in this area. Everyone who has an acre of land in this area has to pay this much. If we do not receive a check for this for this much, we will go to that acre of land and we will take it away from whoever is there and put it up for sale to anybody else. You can't take that acre of land and move it to a Swiss bank account or the Cayman Islands. And then the idea that the middle class will be punished more. I mean, a lot of the middle class rents. They don't even own any land. And the middle class that does own land, well, they don't own a lot, and they don't own really good land. So they shouldn't be that hurt. So it should be difficult to avoid this tax, and it is only going to be heavy on those who own a lot of valuable land. Which really, here, let me show you. Um, here. Here's somebody who proposed something for Denver. What? Okay, I don't want that pic. I want here. Go here. Is that the best map? I guess. Huh. Yeah, alright. So, like, here's Denver. Um, and you can see this is like downtown Denver. I guess if we pull up um, satellite, I don't know. Satellite's not great. Anyway, I guess you can see that this red is super high land value. Red over here, super high land value. And then immediately around it, it drops off pretty quickly. It's like, I mean, this is getting into the, like this is, red is $150, 150 to $300 per square foot. And then this light orange is $4 to $5. And this medium orange is up to like 10, 20, 30, 40. So just even just living right around the edges are all this over here, um, which like, I mean, I don't know, living over here doesn't seem like you're that far away from downtown Denver. I don't know. We could put, right, like if this is like heart of Denver, how do I drop a directions? All right, yeah. We'll do directions from here. Um, to there. That's 2 miles. So you could live 2 miles away from downtown Denver. I'm trying to get a sense of like, okay, that's where those two freeways cross. That's right here. Yeah, so this is like in this area, you're paying 7 to 10 or maybe $15 to $20 per square foot. That's like 10 times less per square foot. You're middle class, you live here. You're middle class, you live here. You're paying $10 to $20 a square foot. The people who own the city should be paying $150 to $300 a square foot. So I don't see this at all as punishing of the middle class. This liberates the middle class and it super liberates the renting class. That's funny. This is just, they don't even price it. They just leave it black. And it's a golf course. Isn't taxing those areas more heavily just going to end up with sky-high rent prices and no one being able to afford them, therefore migrating everyone out of downtown and into the more affordable suburbs, and therefore increasing rent for everyone anyways? Uh, so there's sort of a question of like, why do you think, why do you think that the landlords would be able to just raise rent on people? If you consider when you're trying to rent an apartment, you don't care how much it costs them to provide that apartment. Like maybe they own this house and they have a huge loan on it, and they're having to pay a huge amount of interest every month for that loan. So it's costing them like $5,000 a month, and they rent it to you for like $2,000 a month, and they're losing a ton of money. And then right next door is an identical apartment that has been owned for a long time. It's just a little old lady that lives or that owns it. She grew up there and she moved away or something. And so her month to month costs are zero. She doesn't have a big loan. I mean, I guess they both have to pay property taxes. Uh, so she has very low costs. So she's renting it to 2,000 for she would rent which one the apartments would both rent for 2,000 a month regardless of the cost, because that's how, supply and demand works. If if when the cost to have apartments, like the cost to ownership went up, people were able to, create identically good land or stop creating land, you could have something like that, but the supply of land is absolutely fixed. I mean, if you want to read a more thorough uh, discussion of this, Can land value tax be passed on to tenants? Um, that is an article by Lars Doucet, who was a consultant in the game industry, but now he is like became like full-time Georgist advocate. Um, so he had some personal family issues, and now he's like primarily a caretaker for a loved one. Um, impact on renters that has. So I think this even. I guess this doesn't talk about whether or not it can be passed on. Alright, we need to make our. Oops, I didn't mean that. Welcome to the 12th week of the Henry George Daily Devotional. We are now on episode 56. We are in chapter 5, The Problem Solved. Chapter 1. This is our. Oops, I mislabeled these. This chapter. What? The primary cause of recurring paroxysmal industrial depression? Is that? No, that's not the. I called that chapter. Oh, I didn't title. What's happening here? Okay, this is chapter 56. This should be book 5, chapter 1. Continued times 2. Um, we were in chapter 1, right? Ay ay ay. Yeah. This is all chapter 1. All right. This I don't know. This was a proposal to Colorado in January of 2024 this year. Well, it has not passed yet, certainly. Um, I don't know its status. But if you here's a link to the proposal. Um, really in Mexicali? I didn't know about that. Yeah, some of these places have more or less things like land value taxes. I mean, in a sense, USA has a land value tax. It's just very, very small, and we have all these other taxes. Um, uh, we have our wave file podcasters. Oh, our audience size is 3. Climbing back up. wave file. Wait a minute. What did I name the wave file? I hope I put the right one in there. Book 5, Chapter 1, continued for the second time. In this episode, I read Book 5, Chapter 1. Um, Book 5, Chapter 1, continued 2. Wave. I wonder now if I can just be uploading MP4s and it just takes the volume from it. Well, it looks like I have a typo here. Colon. Save. Comments. It is interesting that there are entire industries founded on this idea of compensation for risk. Why should risk ever be compensated? Risk and change are regular parts of life because there are no guarantees aside from risk and change themselves. Statistics are not oracles. Risk tolerance is very varying. Why is risk taking more valuable than stability? There's no. Yeah, I suspect the forms of risk management industries would be quite different without government regulations. But I do think they would exist. I'm I'm a pretty conservative person with my money, and really feel uncomfortable. I don't when I win times or near of insurance and friends. The basic idea of insurance is like a super clever math trick to distribute shared risk. I like the example of hole in one insurance. Janning is one of the most active Georgists on the Discord, so we talk almost every day, maybe not quite. One insurance in golf. There's a tradition that when you hit a hole in one, you buy everyone at the bar a drink after the round. Then a tradition built up around everyone paying $1 a month or something to have insurance for this. So when you do hit a hole in one, you don't have to buy everyone drinks, but the house will pay for everyone's drinks. You may, or of course, it's completely optional. For years, my dad paid into this insurance at his country club, never hit a hole in one. Uh, eventually he quit the country club and then randomly hit a hole in, well, it's always randomly, and then randomly, aren't they always random? Hole in one on a public course where there's not really a community or anything, so he didn't have to buy anyone drinks. Make of that what you will. George will talk more about services. Ah, awesome. I'm excited. I'm excited. Yeah. Um, now, no, 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 no. 156. Next. Next. Publish. Cool. 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 We real cool. What am I doing? I have some Georgist pings. Um, what's this other? Oh, That's taken care of. Yeah, it is. But I might take myself for a walk. I have some personal emails I suppose I could respond to, but I don't think I shall right now. I don't think I'm going to read this right now. I kind of want to watch this, but I don't know. I'll bookmark it. Yeah, I got a lot on my reading list right now. Yeah. Alright, I'm gonna go for a walk and then get to work on Flock of Dogs. Quite a late start. You should get to work on your work too. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for asking questions and sharing thoughts. It's fun to discuss it in a safe space.